Greetings, book lovers everywhere, and welcome to E-Train Talks. I'm your host, E-Train. I'm a 13-year-old literacy advocate, Giving Tuesday Spark leader, and the host of E-Train Talks, as I just said. So here on E-Train Talks, I interview the writers, illustrators, and creators of all kinds of amazing books. And today's a pretty lucky day for me, because I got the chance of welcoming a favorite storyteller back onto my show. He's a writer of suspenseful nonfiction and historical fiction books for middle schoolers and young adults, a former textbook writer turned adventure history writer, and three-time National Book Award finalist and Newbery honoree. And if you've not guessed who I'm referring to, well, it's fellow member of the tribe, writing hero, and all-around amazing person, Steve Sheinkin. It's
Wow.
it's an honor to welcome you back. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Mr. E. That's a really nice, wow, what a nice intro. And it is great to be back.
Well, it's great to have you. And I'm super lucky to have the chance to talk to you again, especially about your newest story, an award winner, Impossible Escape. So I read Impossible Escape, and I know firsthand just how deserving the story is, and I'm super proud of you. And I'm proud to be able to help spread the word about your book and the incredible writing journey that you have traveled and traversed to get this story out into the world. So without further ado, let's get right into it.
All right.
Woo! So, when we last talked, Impossible Escape had yet to arrive in the book world. So, for those who have not yet read it, will you please talk a little bit about it?
Sure. I mean, the name gives you kind of a hint, and I
Mhm.
really wanted it to. The really key story in it is a young Jewish teenager from Slovakia who gets thrown into Auschwitz, this Nazi, most dreaded of Nazi concentration camps, and escapes. I mean, it took him 2 years to come up with a plan because it really was thought to be impossible. But this is the story of how he got out. And not only that, but was the first person to give an eyewitness account to the outer world of what was really happening there. And it ended up saving thousands and thousands of lives.
Mhm. Yeah, and it's a very, very powerful story. And just think, like, everybody picture yourself back then. I mean, you're in Auschwitz, and it can be really hard to just keep the motivation to keep living on, to tell your story. My lights are flickering, perfect time. Um, Yeah, actually, no, it is the perfect time and like it's spooky.
Yeah, it is. It's
Yeah.
dramatic.
Okay. Keep flickering. Okay. So here you are in Auschwitz. You probably could lose a ton of motivation to live. And our main character, he just kept on fighting, kept believing in himself and remembered who he is, kept hold of that.
Yeah.
He escaped.
It's
So,
amazing. Yeah.
yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I get inspired by this story too, and it's not like I'm praising my own work. We're telling a true story about this remarkable. I have a 17-year-old kid. I mean, I realize how young that is. Maybe
Hmm.
to you it doesn't seem super young, but it probably does in some ways. And yeah, to be in that situation, and what's amazing about Rudy Verba, the main character in this story, many things, but he it's page one, he leaves home to set off on this adventure. He's going to find some way to fight the Nazis. It doesn't go exactly at all to plan.
Yeah.
But all that while, as he was in this series of camps, he was determined to escape. And you're so right. It was hard enough to survive one day, sometimes 1 hour. You would need perseverance, skill, luck, help, all of these things over and over again every day. And yet, on top of all of that, which of course is more than enough to deal with, he was determined to escape, not just to save himself, though, of course, that was his initial motivation, but to sound the alarm, to tell the world what
Right.
they couldn't possibly know from the outside. Yes, there were rumors of what was happening, but no eyewitness accounts. And so, yeah, to have done all that as a teenager, you're right, is incredible.
Hmm. So my next question for you is, as most readers of your stories probably know, you devote a great deal of time researching information for your stories, and for Impossible Escape, you find yourself on quite a trek. So you followed in the footsteps of Rudolph and Alfred and their impossible escape. They went through all, they went from Auschwitz to Slovakia across a lot of Europe. So it was an 80-mile escape. And I mean, just thinking about walking 80 miles, brings me a headache. So what was the journey like, and what emotions did you feel while traveling?
That's right. And their escape, and it's true. Escaped with his friend Alfred, and and they were both from the same small town in Slovakia. So they knew getting out was, as I've said, it was considered virtually impossible. It was so heavily guarded,
Hmm.
layers and layers of guards. But even if you did, let's say you did, you're in
Yeah.
occupied Poland, Nazi occupied Poland. That was more dangerous almost than being in the camp because you're so recognizable as a prisoner. Your head is shaved, you've been starved, you have a number tattooed on your arm. You don't, if you do speak Polish, it's going to be with an accent that gives you away as a foreigner. There's no way to blend in. And everyone there knows Poles who were occupied, but they knew that even if they wanted to help you, they could be killed for doing that. And so, yeah, their trip of 80 and maybe ended up being a little more than 80 miles to the border of Slovakia and then into Slovakia took weeks. And it shouldn't take that long to obviously to walk that far, but they had to travel in these tiny, tiny pieces of time in the middle of the night, and then try to hide in forests or clumps of trees, whatever they could during the day. And so as part of the research, yes, I went to the camp and toured the camp and then met up with a group of people, and they do this every year to commemorate and honor what Rudy and Alfred did. They meet at the camp and then they walk. They take 6 days. So it's not as unreasonable. You could do it. You could do it. My 14-year-old son David wants to do it with me, and I feel like he'd be a little bit shocked at first at how hard it is, because it seems walking. Come on, how hard is it? We all walk every day. But the first couple of days I did it, I was on this march. They walked about 20 miles a day and started out on roads, which, believe it or not, was harder because the pavement after a while is just really
Oh,
hard
yeah.
on your feet. And then through a lot of forests, and eventually it gets very mountainous, which was key to their escape because they had to stay in remote areas. And luckily, that stretch of southern Poland is pretty rural even today and mountainous. But yeah, you could do it. Maybe train a little bit more than I did.
Yeah.
I went there, and then there were these serious hikers. There were, they showed when I showed up, I didn't know anything about it. And there were these kind of people my age, but they looked much more serious, and they had those poles, that you think are
Yeah.
skiing. And was I supposed to bring that? I didn't bring anything like that. And so, but it was super meaningful, super meaningful. And of course, anytime that I said, boy, this is hard, boy, my legs are tired, I'm hungry. I felt ashamed because
Yeah.
what we were doing was so easy. I mean, yeah, it was hard, but there was no danger to it. And so but it is essential. Well, I don't know, is it essential? But to me, it felt essential as part of the research to not just see the camp, which I think is essential, but to see the landscape too, what they walked through. And it helped me. I had written a draft already, but it helped me go back and describe what the mountains look like and even just understanding the slopes and what they meant when they described the angles of the hills and things like that, and what views look like from certain places. So all of that to me is part of the research, and I take all that back to this room before I start writing.
Yeah. And my next question for you is kind of a follow-up. So I read that for part of your research, you spoke with the family members of the two incredibly brave men who made the trek. So can you share who you spoke to in relation to them, and what was it like?
Yeah, I spoke to people who knew Rudy is really the main. Well, actually, he's really the main character, and I spoke to some people who knew him. And then the other main character, and she's pictured on the cover. Her name is Gerta Sidnova, and she was Rudy's friend. They were friends when they were your age in Slovakia, and they were, of course, separated by the war when he was swept into the camps. She had her own incredible escape and survival story too. And then they met up at the end. They eventually went at the very end of the book, because I end the book when they're still teenagers, but they go off to school together. And it's kind of like the end of that story, the beginning of their
Hmm.
rest of the most of their life. So the person I got closest to in terms of family members was Goethe, who actually lived right up into the pandemic. She
Oh,
had a
really?
whole roller coaster of a life, wound up in London, and her daughter still lives there. And I just missed talking to Goethe, but I did talk with her daughter, and that is essential. Sometimes you get stories, especially for someone who's not as famous. Rudy did a lot of interviews, and you can go online right now and find a lot of oral history, audio and video that he did, and that's invaluable. And she's not well known. She wrote a couple of books which were very useful, but yeah, talking to her daughter was super helpful. I got stories, photographs that just don't exist anywhere but maybe in this apartment in London. And there's and I don't, you probably noticed, I didn't use photos in the book.
Yeah.
I didn't want that to be part of the story. I had some maps, but it's just I didn't feel that that was a necessary part of the story, and I didn't, well, I just didn't, design wise, I just somehow it didn't feel quite right. So, but there's one in the very back, and that's of Rudy and Goethe in 1944, so it's still during the war, that he had escaped, she had escaped, although there was more trouble for her to come. And there's someone snapped this picture of them together, and they just look like a really young, great-looking young couple, and you wouldn't never dream from the picture what they've been through. And there's just nothing like it. And that it existed, of course, you can find something online. That doesn't mean you can really use it, especially for publishers, because they're going to say, well, who has the rights to this? We can't just use this in the book. And so talking to the family sometimes is the only way to get
Yeah.
a quality version of that, and then the permission to use a photo like that. So yeah, to me, that's also a really important part of the research.
Absolutely. And my next question is kind of continuing with their story. So I read that in November of 1944, the New York Herald Tribune described the Verba Wetzler report, the report written by your two heroes, as the most shocking document ever issued by a United States government agency. I just think it's mind-boggling that more people don't know about Rudolf, Alfred, and of course Goethe's story. And I feel like while there are definitely oral interviews, oral histories told, I think they should be celebrated more and discussed more in literature and other media outlets, especially today. So why do you think it's the case that their tale isn't as widely beloved and widely told? And is that kind of why you decided to share their story with the kidlit world?
That's definitely why I decided to, because it is such an amazing, inspiring story of heroism. So yeah, definitely that's the short answer. But why? That's a great question. I mean, there's so many stories, more than we can all just hold in our heads at the same time.
Mhm.
Yeah, and when that report, that's interesting, that quote from 1944, because it did hit the newspapers, and that's another thing that's very important to research. Go back and look at what was happening in the newspapers at the
Yeah.
time, and you'll see articles that cite that. Sometimes they call that the Auschwitz report or the Auschwitz protocol, but they never use Verba and Alfred Wetzler's name, because those weren't in the report, and nobody knew at the time. That wasn't publicized. They were still living in hiding. The war was still going on. They were living in hiding in Slovakia at that time. So their names weren't associated with it, even though that report made a big splash in the media and had a huge impact. Their names weren't associated with it. And then after the war, they kind of went back to, or tried to restart, something like normal lives, and were not famous at all throughout their lifetimes. I agree with you that it's not too late to do them justice and to keep telling those stories.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think it's super cool that there are hikes devoted to them, that there are still people out there who hold on to these stories and celebrate them, even when a lot of others don't. And continuing on with their tale, it's kind of a transition into yours. So, I discovered online that the Illinois Holocaust Museum and Education Center is holding a workshop on impossible escape for middle and high school educators. I think it's fantastic. We need to not only share Rudy, Alfred, and Goethe's story, but also just getting teachers, getting kids involved with books is super important and the early literacy and everything like that. Okay, so that's a long-winded like rant to the actual question. So, is this something that we can find more of from you? And do you yeah, okay, Dad, cut that out. I'm just gonna repeat the question. Okay. I discovered online that the Illinois Holocaust Museum and Education Center is holding a workshop on your book for middle and high school educators. I think it's fantastic. So, is this something that we can find more of from you? And do you visit classrooms and talk about your books?
I do. And thank you for mentioning that. Maybe we can put a link
Yeah, definitely.
and people. Of course, it's in the Chicago area, so it'll only be useful to people around there probably. But yes, I'll be doing lots more of that. I've really just started talking about this book. I have been to some schools, and that's just a big part of my job. That's a big part of most writers' jobs, I think, is to go to schools. And I was in Houston yesterday talking about different books, and that's just a big part of my working life, which I love actually, because most days I'm literally in this room all the time, and I don't talk. Most days I don't talk except to myself, so it's useful to get out there. But yeah, this one is meaningful to talk about. I feel like it, it's difficult. I mean, in terms of the
Definitely.
subject matter, it's a
Yeah.
difficult story, but it's serious and it is in, you know, the curriculum of what students really should learn, usually in eighth grade, maybe
Mhm.
sometimes in high school. It's not for younger kids. And so yeah, I'm doing a lot of that and hoping to do a lot more. And it's really, again, like everything in this that we're talking about, a kind of a tribute to what they did when Rudy lived his whole life, a whole rich life. He went back to school. He got back to school. He was kicked out as a Jewish kid. He was kicked out of
Yeah.
school when he was 14, so he had to redo all of high school and went on to get a PhD in chemistry. He was a brilliant guy and had a whole life and a whole career, but he was also through his whole life a Holocaust educator, and he would talk any chance he got, tell his story, what he experienced, what it meant to him. And he especially loved to and found it meaningful to talk to students and to tell his story. And one thing he would never, first of all, he rejected the title of hero, which is amazing that he would do that. But the other thing is that he wouldn't tell you what to make of it. And I got this is in the very end of my book. I talked to a friend of his and said, well, what would Rudy here? I'd like to end the book with something that he liked to say. How would he sum up his talks when he told his story? And this man said, he didn't do that. He didn't do your work for you. He just told you the story and he trusted you then to know what to do. And so that I've kind of taken on a little mini part of that mission.
I love that. And now, your journey, both physical and emotional, of researching and writing The Impossible Escape, it ended up being so worth it. Not only because you're able to educate students and the world about Rudy and Alfred and Goethe, but also because you were awarded a Sidney Taylor Honor for Young Adults. I mean, I'm gonna stop this question right here for a round of applause. Woo! So I'm so happy for you. And where were you, and what was your reaction when you first heard the news?
Yeah, I had come home from work and I was just kind of sitting on a or maybe lying down, to be honest. Like I just sometimes come home and just lie on my couch
Yeah.
and 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 I got that phone call, that phone call that everyone dreams of and talks about, and it was a great feeling. It's super meaningful to me to get that award specifically for Jewish books
Mhm.
and for this one, for any book, because I started out, that's how I started out is writing Jewish stories. But yeah, especially for this one. And then the funniest thing about it, and I actually really like this, maybe it's a personality thing, is they tell you they get really serious. They say, congratulations and all that. Then they get really serious and say, but you can't tell anyone. Oh yeah, you can tell your spouse, your editor. That's it. Because they inform the publisher anyway, so the editor's going to find out. And then you cannot tell, no leaks. And I kind of think that's really fun. And I had a few days of just kind of knowing this secret thing before they make that big announcement at ALA.
Yeah.
And I think There's something really fun about that.
Yeah. It's like I know something you don't.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah, with Josh Levy's The Jake Show, I got told a little bit earlier because I'm doing the blog tour for that thingy.
Yeah.
Like that's pretty cool. Like you just hear about it before and you're like, yeah, words cannot describe how cool that is. And hopefully one day one of my actual books that I will write, definitely
Yeah,
if
absolutely. You'll
I can
get
get
that
my
call.
attention span. I can get
Okay.
my attention span up, then I'll definitely try and write a book. And hopefully I'll have a Sidney Taylor honor
Yeah.
or award or even notable just in my bookshelf at my house
I
or wherever
believe
I live.
I believe in that for sure.
So my next question for you is kind of we talked about your Rabbi Harvey series a little bit in the first interview that I did with you. And just to refresh everybody on the Rabbi Harvey series, I discovered it through PJ Arway some time ago, and it really makes you smile. Not only is Rabbi Harvey a wise person, he has a wise soul as well. And seeing Jewish traditions celebrated, especially in graphic novel form, which is something you definitely do not always see, it's really refreshing. So when did you start the series, and were you inspired by your own rabbi?
Ah, there's a lot of good material there. But yes, and it ties into what you were just asking because like I said, this was the first book that I ever got published was the Rabbi Harvey books. But it took a really long time. My rabbi at my Hebrew school when I was bar mitzvah was named Harvey.
Oh, really?
But I hope he's not listening because I didn't find him to be very wise. And maybe that was just me being 13, and not really getting it.
But we have
But
your Rabbi Harvey coming in right now.
yeah, oh, no, no, sorry, sir. You taught me well. But I just really love the sound of the name. And obviously it did inspire me because I always remembered it and remembered I always liked him. I
Yeah.
found him really fun. So yeah, and the other thing that happened was that my dad gave me books of Jewish folk tales. And that was also during Hebrew school when I was saying, oh, now I don't know if you're probably much more mature than I was. But I said, oh, why do I have to go? I don't want to go,
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, you understand.
Yeah, I
So
get
he
that.
said, well, it's not so much about memorizing prayers, which you have to do, by the way,
Mhm.
but it's really about this. And he would show me these folk tales that would, in a much different way and much more meaningful way to me, get out this 2000 plus years of tradition and wisdom and humor. I said, yeah, this I like, this I can relate to. And so all that mixed together in my mind, and when I was much later, 20s, late 20s, I started just drawing comics of a rabbi, and I pictured him in the Wild West for some reason. I think also just because I love American Westerns
Yeah.
as literature, as movies. I love, stories set in that world. And I just thought, and that's American folklore mixing with Jewish folklore, which makes perfect sense for an American Jewish kid.
Yeah.
So at least it did to me. So I started drawing these comics of a rabbi in the Wild West who's also kind of the sheriff of his town, but of course he doesn't use a gun at all. He just uses his wit and wisdom. And and I gotta say, nobody got it at all. I started sending it around. Of course, I didn't know how to write a book. I certainly didn't know how to publish a book. I started sending them around to publishers and got so many rejections. And at first, rightfully so, because it probably just wasn't very good. But I made it better and better and better. And eventually, yeah, eventually got that first book published, which meant so much to me. It was my first book in many years in the making, very personal. And that became, I did 3 books like that. That became my first, okay, maybe I can really, really
Yeah.
do this. Maybe I can do this. And it was just, it meant so much to me ever since. I still want to do more ever since I've done them. I haven't done one in a while, but in a way, the most meaningful books personally that I did, just because I put so much of myself into them.
Yeah, and personally love them. I was talking actually to my rabbi. So the first interview that he'd heard of mine was actually yours because he loves Rabbi Harvey. He shared
Ah,
it.
nice, nice.
So that's a pretty cool full circle experience, inspired by your
Yeah,
rabbi and then my rabbi, first thing that he notices. So
that's great.
Rabbi Harvey is very meaningful, both to me and to everybody. We all love it, and hopefully you can bring it back.
Oh, I hope so. I'm trying. I'm trying.
Yeah. So, Children's Bookshelf just recently released the cover of your new
Oh yeah.
historical fiction work entitled The Bletchley Riddle. It's with Ruta Sepetys, and it looks amazing. I mean, all your books are incredible, but we're combining two middle grade and YA historical fiction masterminds here. Of course, you got in one corner Steve Sheinkin, the one, the only, and in the other we have Ruta. So, and she is a powerhouse of writing. Both of you, we're gonna have like Infinity Gauntlet here of historical fiction writing. A snap of the fingers, and the greatest book is gonna be out. So
Mm.
that's a long-winded into can
Eh,
you share a little bit about your upcoming story without giving away any spoilers?
yeah, and I'm happy to. And that's a very flattering intro. But it's true. Root is awesome. She's mostly known for young adult historical fiction. She has, I mean, adult fans too, all over the world. And she's constantly traveling. She's a real superstar. But she is a fellow history nerd as well. And so there's that, if there's a Venn diagram, there's definitely a big piece in the middle that we cross over. And so we just started talking at conferences where we would meet up and really hit it off. And maybe 5 years ago, we were on a panel and someone asked, I think they asked her, hey, would you ever consider collaborating with anyone? And I don't know that she thought about it that much, but we kind of made eye contact as that question was asked, saying,
Hmm.
I bet we could do something together. We didn't have an idea, but we just started batting them around and hit upon, again, there was many things that we were both interested in, but hit upon code breaking in Britain during World War II, specifically the code breakers who broke the German Enigma code. And they were at this place called Bletchley Park, which is really famous in Britain, probably fairly well known in the States too, but it was a country estate that the British government took over and used as this secret code breaking center, kind of like what we did with Los Alamos, taking over this boarding school on the top of a mountain in New Mexico and turning it into, this place where scientists built the atomic bomb. And it's equally incredible what they did intellectually, breaking this thought to be unbreakable German code. And and so yeah, we bonded over that. Let's do something with that. And that's a long way from a book because you kind of have to figure out, well, what's it
Yeah.
really actually about? How are we
It's
going
like
to
its
write
own
it
riddle.
together? Yeah, so we decided we hit upon being each writing a different voice in, chapters going back and forth. And then I would be the older brother and she would be the younger sister, both teenagers, and who live and work at Bletchley Park, which was realistic. They really did recruit young people. And so that's the setting. And you can guess some of the plot as the older brother who was the code breaker is working on the Enigma machines and that cipher. And Ruta's character, who's the younger one, it works as a messenger, which is also realistic. Kids as young as 14, mostly girls, were hired in these really important and top secret positions,
Yeah.
and which is amazing because and again, we both are nerdy about this, and we get really excited when we find true things. We went to England together and to London and Bletchley Park together and did lots of interviews and took a million photographs and did a lot of research. And so there's a lot of code breaking in the story, but also just hopefully a really fun mystery. We wanted to do it. And initially, when we started talking about doing it, publishers thought they were picturing a much more kind of YA
Hmm.
slash
Okay.
adult book. And that's not what we wanted to do. We really wanted to do a middle grade adventure novel in the spirit of the Mysterious Benedict Society, that sort of thing. And so that was our goal. And so it was a little bit different from what she does normally. It's a little bit different from what I do normally because it's fiction and you get to make up dialogue, which turns out to be a lot of fun. I can't do that obviously in my nonfiction books.
Yeah.
And so yeah, we'll be talking a lot more about that in the months to come. I'm sure we could come on together and do a whole,
Yeah.
yeah, if you're not tired of interviewing me yet, we could do that and then talk
Here
about
comes the
that
time.
book. And but that was exciting. It was such a change of pace for me, both because it's collaboration, because it's fiction, and and just a lot of fun to write. And I can only hope some of that fun comes through in the mystery and in the story that we wrote.
Yeah, and I feel like when you add fictional elements to these historical historical stories, it can really add more readers who aren't just big history buffs. It's history is so exciting, especially when you get it into book form. So we are all super duper wowed by the
Mhm.
collaboration and also wowed by just the perfection, the idea, and we can't wait.
Oh, thank you. I can't wait for people to start seeing it.
So I would normally ask if you could be any literary character, that question, but I've already asked you that. So I had to come up with a different kind of question. So my question for you is if you could meet any historical person, if you could meet, it could be somebody like Albert Einstein, it could be Alan Turing, anybody in history, who would you want to meet and why?
Alan Turing's good. He was at Bletchley Park, as I know you know, and he definitely makes a cameo, an important uh, cameo in our book. Yeah, man, that is a hard question. I want to give you something super meaningful, but you know what? But I have to be selfish and just think of what I would really want to do.
Yeah.
And you may know, like the first, I talked about the Rabbi Harvey books, but the first really middle grade narrative nonfiction book that I wrote was about Benedict Arnold, who was a traitor in the American Revolution. And why I happen to have a copy of it right here.
Oh,
Notorious Benedict Arnold. And he's just over the top. Everyone knows the traitor thing if they know anything, but that's such a, well, this goes back to textbook writing. I'd always try to get him in textbooks because I said, "Oh, kids think history is boring. Let me tell you a story.
yeah,
You won't believe it. Action, adventure, spying, romance, everything over the top." And the textbook editors would always say, "Well, there's not really room for that. Just say he was a traitor. That's it. That's the only thing that would ever be on any test." And so that was infuriating to me. And I researched it a lot and did, even before I had a contract, I was writing and trying to figure out how to tell that story. And he is fascinating, but an enigma in his own right. Very strange, brilliantly talented guy,
Mhm.
self-destructive too, though. Really, I think kind of tough to get along with. I'm not saying that I would have liked him because a really overbearing guy, super
Yeah,
sensitive, huge ego, but really gifted too, and hugely important in American history. So, I mean, yeah, if I could go back and hang out with him for a while, I feel like I would learn stuff that just doesn't come across those centuries.
yeah,
Everyone has a different theory about it, but people are always the same, I feel like, in different times and places.
true.
And and so I feel like I could get to know him in a different way. Would I like him? No, probably not. Uh, but that's one of the ones that jumps to my mind just because, well, first of all, I mean, of course, who doesn't love a villain character? And he's
Right.
kind of the all-time great villain character, but he's so much like any good villain, he's so much more than that.
Mhm.
So much richer than that. And his story is sort changed in his story because it was all told after the fact, after we had decided he was this devil figure.
Mhm.
And that really skewed, obviously, the way that we look at him.
Well, that is an amazing answer and a perfect way.
Is it?
I mean, okay. So he's Benedict Arnold, right? But I feel like the way you worded it, I may not I, I may not want like to potentially like be friends with Benedict Arnold, but if I like maybe talk to him that one time, then maybe we just went our separate ways. Then it might be like the most amazing thing ever.
It
But
might.
I don't think I should spend like a ton of extra time with him because he is a bit of a, traitor. So,
Yeah, yeah, I know. And I'm not forgiving or apologizing for that or anything, but it's
yeah,
just more the fascination aspect of it.
definitely. So, now that was the final question of the interview, sadly, and I'm just blown away by everything you've done and continue to do to bring compelling and important historical reads into the world. So many stories go untold and are not taught enough in schools. Like, for instance, Rudy and Alfred's his heroic journey. Of course, Goethe as well. So, that's why I'm so grateful for all the work that you do to make history accessible and enjoyable to kids and adults for that matter. So, thank you.
Thank you, E-Train. This was great as always. It's so fun to talk to you.
And it's also super fun for me as well. So,
Good.
yeah, this has been another fantastic talk, Steve, although I couldn't expect anything less because you are the man. So,
Thank you.
I keep saying so. I gotta stop doing
Oh,
it. Okay. I'm so
now you got me saying it. So,
Yeah. I'm so happy that, oh, there it is again. I'm so happy I get to spend time talking with the extraordinary writing legend, Steve Sheinkin. And by the way, if you've yet to watch Steve's awesome he has a YouTube show too. It's called Author Fan Face Off. Kids face off, or readers for that matter, face off against other authors in an epic author fan face off. Not to the death, just to 4 questions or so. It's not more
that's how we met, right?
yeah.
That's
That's
how we
exactly
first,
how we met. And
yeah,
it was with A.S. King, and if I just remember, are you there, God? It's me, Margaret. It was 1 year ago, but it still haunts me how I just so close yet so far.
oh, the answer. Wow, you still see now you know it. Now you know the
Yeah,
answer.
I mean, well now I know it.
Yeah. That's great. I'm so glad we connected on that. And thank you for mentioning that show. We're still doing it. So I mean I have an actual job I'm supposed to be doing. But in the meantime, as you know, as you have a actual school you need to be doing, but you find time for
Yeah,
to make these cool videos. So I agree. I think it's a fun thing to do.
it is. And everybody, you all need to read Impossible Escape and all of Steve's phenomenal reads. You will not regret it. And while that is all the time I have for today, I know that you guys take some time out of your days to read Steve's books, check out Author Fan Face Off, and maybe go on Steve's website as well. And that'll be in the description down below. So until next time, stay safe, keep reading, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.